ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, Nathan Bell. Joining me, as always, Zach Bartles. Zach, what's going on, man?
What are you talking about? I did not spend 2 hours today watching a documentary called BBS about bulletin board systems run in the late 70s. Why would I do that? Why bring it up?
Oh, man.
It's not the sort of thing that
I
interests
don't
me.
even know where to go from there.
You know what? We just rocked the Casbah.
That's it, folks. Signing off. So Zach, tell me about this documentary.
What documentary? Oh, the one I didn't watch? I don't know about it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I did run a bulletin board system, I will have you know. When I was I don't know, 15, 16, 17-year-old. The Lamb BBS. It was a Christian BBS. I was the co-sysop.
That's great. That's great. Oh, man. Dude, something you did do today, or you're going to do today, is talk to us about missionalware. Tell me a little bit about that.
Missionalware. All right, you know what? I got a bunch of products to talk about, but I want to talk about service. All right?
All right.
Because
let's hear about service.
For funsies, we were busting chops, you know, on our boy Jeff, and I said again last week that was all in good fun, and anything I've ever ordered has come quickly. Well, let me tell you what I realized. I was on Facebook and I saw my boy Josh Loftus. I'm going to just give a little quick plug for this guy's new podcast, The Reformatory.
Nice.
And he also does Every Day a Monday, and I've been on that. It's a good podcast. He's a good guy. I saw a picture of his study, and there he had a Spurgeon bust, and on the front of the Spurgeon bust, it says Charles Spurgeon, and I'm going, I don't think mine says that. So I texted him, and I'm like, what's going on with that? Did you get that made or something? And he was like, no, it was in the box. It was in a little plastic bag. And you know, you pull out, you stick them on the front of the... And I realized I had accidentally thrown away the nameplates. So I contacted Jeff, and now get this. This is what you call kismet or something. Because... I said, is there any way I can get some more of these nameplates? He said, yeah, sure. And since I'm sending you stuff, is there anything else you want? So I told him a few other things I might want to see. So I'm glad I threw away those nameplates. So yeah,
Nice.
if you, I remember the first thing that I ever bought off Missionalware was a journal ages ago. I mean, Missionalware has been around for a long time. And it's not some, you know, there's a lot of like fly-by-night wannabe missionalwares out there, and you know, they don't hold up. This one's stood the test of time, and the first one that I remember, I was very pleasantly surprised how quickly things came. And then after me and Ted got our one gut check shirt up, he had said he was going to send some, but we were like, you know what, let's just buy some. Let's buy them. We'll see how quick we can get them. So we used the Gut Check debit card and bought 2 Gut Check Army T-shirts, which, holy cow, I'm actually wearing right now.
Nice.
And I had to check under my Grand Rapids Theological Seminary sweatshirt, but yes. And they came like 2 days later. I mean, like whatever system he's got in place for fulfilling orders, whatever it says it's going to be quicker probably, or at least
quick.
He's not going to leave you hanging.
Yeah.
Missionalware. I mean, I'm going to tell you about other stuff that I got, like a cigar case that is amazing, and I'm going to tell you about some coasters, and I'm going to tell you about some other stuff. But absolutely, the service you get there is very good, and you can meet the guy behind it all if you want at just about any conference where people lean toward the Calvinistic, and that's kind of cool. And also, I've found him to be very open to like people's suggestions of what kind of products they'd like to see. drop him a line,
Nice,
and he's
nice.
always developing new stuff. So, yeah, definitely go to missionalwear.com. And honestly, what you have to do, and I'm torn between our obligation to the sponsor and my obligation as a man of the cloth. I'm gonna go with the man of the cloth and say, before you get on there, tell yourself, make an agreement, covenant with yourself, if you will, how much money you're going to spend, because otherwise you're going to click add, and you're going to look at your little cart, and even though things are very reasonably priced, you're going to have a very large debt that you owe. And I mean, nice as he is, he's going to get his money, and
That's right.
you don't want a guy with that kind of, like, he's got like the Andre Agassi build where it's like a tennis build, but his arms are really absurdly huge. Like some of the muscles on his arms seem like they have their own muscles. So you don't want to get on the wrong side of all that. That a guy who's so in tune with the total depravity, and all the other four, points of Calvinism. I'll tell you what, you want to see irresistible grace. And by grace, I mean somebody getting their money that you owe them. Just no, man, really, really get on there and check it out. We've got products on there. I think that These Go to 11 has probably half a dozen basic products with kind of different versions of a few of them. And we'd love to see pictures of you sporting your These Go to 11 stuff on Twitter, on Facebook. It'd be a cool way both to get the word about the podcast out and to get the word about Missional Wear out. So do that. Do it. No, I'm serious. Do it.
Do it now. Just do it. Nice.
I said do it.
Now, Zach, you've wrapped up your Kickstarter with your audio recordings. Tell us how that's going.
Well, I told you right before we started recording that I had gotten the new mic that I bought with the money that's not yet come in from Kickstarter, because they always make you wait like 3 weeks. And then I also have... You want to hear... I hadn't planned on talking about this, but it's kind of funny, and I'd like to hear as a kind of audio guy with your own studio setup, I'd like to hear your take on this. I have decided to build my own kind of semi-mobile recording booth because I did all of the recording of Clinch in my study at the church. Most of them sound quite good. You can tell when I use different mics. I have had 7 different setups for audio over the past 7 or 8 years. My favorite, weirdly, I think the thing that sounded best was a regular vocal mic from my GarageBand days, plugged into this iRig thing and plugged into my phone, an old phone I had. And it recorded really crisp, and then that phone broke, and I got a newer, better phone, and it didn't sound good anymore. So anyway, what I'm doing this time, to make sure that these don't sound at all do-it-yourself. The last thing I want is to listen to this and go, good enough for somebody threw this together. Sounds like a podcast. I want it to sound, as we say in the audio world, completely dry. I want it to be utterly without any kind of spatial reverberation, without any maxing out, without any just nothing to distract. Right. I have purchased, and you wouldn't believe the hours I put into the research on this. I've purchased quite a large number of tiles, soundproofing tiles, which I now have, and a couple of sound blankets, and I'm going to build. And I went through 7 or 8 different designs on this. What I decided on is a kind of a V shape. That's going to go on my desk, and somebody who's more of an audio nerd than me is going to try and point out something wrong with this. I've trust me, it's going to work fine. I've experimented already with different versions of it. But basically, it'll have hinges so it can be stored easily. It's going to open up. Inside, it'll be 3 feet tall, 3 feet deep. You never want to square, of course, because of the way sound travels. I mean, that's real basic physics type stuff. But it'll be like just in front of me, and then on top as well. Again with the soundproof tiles, and then over that the soundproof blanket, which will go over my head and behind me. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm essentially encased in, and then I'm going to have a couple of lights mounted up there so I can actually read the books.
Right.
And I'm getting to work on that this weekend, and I'm hoping to start recording audiobooks next week. I had two different people hit me up and say, "Hey, I know it's done, but is it too late to get in on this?" And I said, "You know what? We're going to have a couple weeks of grace period since I'm in control of my audiobooks at this point completely. I get to do
Right.
that. So if you go on the Kickstarter, if you missed it, if you go on the Kickstarter and you choose a tier, PayPal the money to me at Zach with an H at pastorzach.com, and tell me, what rewards you're signing up for and stuff. I'll get you on the list, because it's just going to be as simple as me shooting out files or access or links to files as they're ready. So it's
Nice.
easy to add people to the list, and I didn't want people to miss out if they were whatever traveling or something or just didn't see it. And a
Sure.
huge shout out, thank you to the Burnhams, who were
Hmm.
amongst the highest of the funders. They hit that top tier, and they are probably in the top 1% as far as listeners that interact with the show and are and
Yeah.
have been and
Yeah.
have been listening for a long time, long before I was on board. They were very bought in, and also Chuck Weebus, whose real name many don't know, but it rhymes with Bob Knutson, and then a buddy of mine from ministry that I've known for years jumped in at that level. A guy named Chris Rulin, which just blew me away that he was supporting my publishing at that level. So really excited, really excited to get going on it. I have been listening to lots and lots and lots of music. I got to decide where I'm going to sink those funds in. I've listened to a number of sound effect type things, but mostly with that kind of stuff and even ambient noise in the background, I'm going to do all that recording myself. I really
Right.
want,
Right.
especially since these things take place in Detroit, Grand Rapids, it's really easy for me to go to the actual place I was thinking of when I wrote the scene and just record the room and give it a little extra feeling of genuine presence. So that's
Yeah.
where that stands, and yeah, I'll give you a few updates as we go along. Really hoping to get that Playing Saint. I wish I could have timed it so that it came out in late October, because that's when it takes place. Sequel also
Right.
takes place
Right.
in late October the next year, but well. What do you think?
Hey, it'll work. It'll work. That's awesome, man. It's great. Great that that's all underway and moving forward. So we will definitely make sure we ask you about that regularly and find out where you are. I know our listeners are eager to get their hands on it. So we'll definitely keep everybody posted on that.
Also going to be available on cassette tape.
Ooh, are you going old school with that
If,
one?
if anyone wants it, I have the equipment, man.
That's awesome.
I actually even have one of those bulk tape duplicators. A church that I went to was getting
Nice.
rid of it. I'm like, they were going to throw it away. I'm like, no, you're not throwing this away. So it belongs to me now.
Nice. Nice.
So that's a lot about me and what I've been watching or not watching and doing. What are you up to, man?
Yeah, things are. It was interesting because I ended up giving up one aspect of what I was doing at school. I was working in the after school program last year, and someone else came in this year, and they took that over, which was great. And I thought I was going to have more time to zero in and focus on some other things in terms of the school and how it runs and all that. And it's just it's been one thing after another. I'm seriously just kind of shocked and impressed how things have not settled down at school yet. I was thinking, by the time October comes around, early October, I was like, all right, well, we'll be into the groove of things. We'll have a couple of kind of high points that'll hit. We have Grandparents' Day and some things like that, and those will be a little busier. But it's just been going nonstop, full force since day one. So, that's really been taking up the majority of my time. That, and then I'm also taking master's classes to increase my education. So that's all just been, throwing me for a loop with everything. So that has been my life work wise. And then you and I weren't able to record last week. And part of that was because I was up in New Hampshire for my brother's wedding. He was getting married. It was a lovely time, beautiful day, beautiful ceremony. And we just all had a fantastic time. Great to bring a new family member in. And it was actually the person that he married was the sister of a girl that I graduated with high school from. And so it was interesting to get caught up with her and find out what she was doing, and just kind of, trip down memory lane, so to speak.
Nice, man. New
Yeah.
Hampshire is the official state of Caucasians. I don't know if you knew that.
I, yeah, it does not surprise me. I don't think I ever officially knew that, but it does not surprise me.
I just made it up also, but yeah. So we hopefully you were able to have the self-disciplined listener to portion out into 2 portions that last episode and make it last 2 weeks so that you wouldn't
That's
be,
right.
having to re-listen. And we know that you can't quit us. We know that.
That's right. So yeah, that's how things have been going. And we had last week or 2 weeks ago when we last recorded, we had actually had another topic that we were going to discuss. And I want to get into that topic, but first, I think we would be a little remiss if we didn't bring up the whole John MacArthur thing that's been going around. And you and I, were texting today about what we were going to do because, we're just such professionals that we plan so far in advance. And you were like, I think that's kind of been done to death. But, we are our own unique entity in Podcast Zach. So I think we at least need to mention it and talk about it briefly. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it because I actually am more interested in the topic that we have planned versus this one. So let's just talk about this whole thing that's been going on with John MacArthur and Beth Moore. Just briefly, we'll touch on it.
Assuming there are some who don't know what it is, you want to just give a synopsis?
Yeah, so the nutshell of it is John MacArthur was doing it was a discussion panel, correct?
It was a Q&A panel, yeah, at I think
yeah.
a conference. It was Todd Friel who was bringing up different words looking for a response. So the fact that it was Todd Friel tells you, and I think that people lose the context, that it was expected it would be funny, it would be entertaining, not that it would be deep theology.
Yeah. And so it was just kind of like, just supposed to be this almost, like you said, just kind of this initial reaction, response to what he was saying. And he brought up Beth Moore's name. And there was an initial response that he had given, correct? I'm a little vague. I had read a different article about what had happened, not the actual.
Okay, I watched the actual thing, and he just said, I think he started to say something that was longer, and he said, no, one word, and he said, go home.
Okay.
And then I think he tried to kind of nuance it after all the laughter died away, because I think he sort of felt like, wait, this might come back to haunt me later on. I mean, there's certainly not some damnable aspect of if he really thinks she's unfit, but I think the thing that you could see it in his eyes that he was, he could feel it coming. And then Phil Johnson was there too. Wherever you find the one, you find the other generally. And Phil Johnson said narcissist, and tried to paint her as kind of the Stephen Furtick-y kind of find yourself in Scripture and make it about you, which I don't I've never noticed that in Beth Moore's
Oh yeah,
teaching
no.
ever. So I thought that was a really odd. This sounded like somebody who had filed Beth Moore away somewhere in his mind, but not
Yeah.
from knowledge, rather just from assumption or association or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and so there's been some good responses. I think the best one you and I had both read independently was Sam Storms, who's a great
Yes.
pastor. And luckily, I think Barnabas Pipe put that out today, so a lot of people will see that might not have otherwise,
Yes.
and will read it. And it was spot on. But I made the mistake of looking at the comments below, and he reached no one who didn't already see things his way.
Right.
I
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
fact posted that on my own Facebook, and I just said comments are disabled, and then underneath
Right.
it in parentheses I said, obviously you can't do that on Facebook, but I just made to say if you try to start an argument about this, I'm going to just delete your
Right. I'm
comment, so
gonna
you're
delete
wasting
it.
your time. And
Yeah.
but Sam Storms basically just said, first of all, he said, I know Beth Moore a little bit. I've sat under a little bit of her teaching. My wife loves her stuff and used to go to her conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're really selling her short and throwing her under the bus for no reason. But that's not why I'm writing. My main reason is because we've lost common courtesy. And he made a great, and there was this Dorothy Sayers quote in there that blew my mind. Because I love Dorothy Sayers. And in the midst of just, scripture and calls for us to be not jerks. And I mean, it's one thing if you are, I mean, and I'm in a weird position here, Nathan, because, we have the randomizer on Gut Check podcast, right?
Right.
Which
Right.
currently reads either Union Seminary or Jonathan Merritt tweets. And we sort of, not sort of, we try not to laugh at them because we think they're absurd, and that's kind of part of the shtick. But at the
Right.
end of the day, I think that there's a difference between, haha, I think that this thing is way off base, and I'm going to point it out not in an angry, mean way, but in a funny way. And
Yes.
this sort of, condemnation, like, an actual, I mean, it's not really an anathema. Maybe it kind of is, but there's a big space there. And when you have Todd Friel involved, it's sort of like saying, okay, it was on the Gut Check podcast. It's sort of the same kind of animal. I'm torn about whether or not this changes my view of Johnny Mack. He's been getting more and more like mean over the years anyway. Go ahead.
Right. Right. Well, and I mean, one of the things too is I think it's those who have been following Gut Check for a while know that you guys, have these segments on Gut Check where you do these things, and that's the spirit in which it's intended. And you and Ted are getting together as friends. You make no bones about that's not necessarily a teaching podcast. You're not there. I mean, you obviously as a pastor, you do filter yourself to a certain extent, but you're not
I
there
do?
necessarily pastorally. um, you're not necessarily on Gut Check pastorally, and we've talked about the tone of our podcast as well. That's not something we're going to do on our podcast, even though we do have sarcastic moments and we do have those times, and we are more like that. We have times where we're breaking things down more theologically, and we're having deeper discussions in this arena. Which is one of the reasons why I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but why I think you enjoy being on this podcast is that there are different arenas for you to be in the podcast thing. What you do with Ted at Gut Check is different than what you and I do together.
Yeah.
And so, but I think when you're having this, Q&A panel, and you are clearly up there as a pastoral figure, you probably should be a little bit more careful and thinking and choosing your words a little bit more wisely. You brought up that Dorothy Sayers quote, which I actually have right here, because you reposted it on your Facebook, and I would like to read that because it is just so profound, and I think it's worth it is worth saying on here.
Let's hear it.
They, women, had never known a man like this man. There never has been such another, a prophet and teacher who never nagged at them, never flattered or coaxed them or patronized, who never made jokes about them, never treated them either as the women, God help us, or the ladies, God bless them, who rebuked without quarrelness and praised without condensation, who took their questions and arguments seriously, who never mapped out their sphere for them, never urged them to be feminine or jeered at them for being female, who had no axe to grind and no uneasy male dignity to defend, who took them as he found them and was completely unself-conscious. There is no act, no sermon, no parable in the whole gospel that borrows its pungency from female perversity. Nobody could possibly guess from the words and deeds of Jesus that there was anything funny about woman's nature.
Yeah.
It is just such, when you go back and you look at what Christ said and the way he really turned society upside down on its head when he entered the world, it is just so profound and distinct. And that should not be, as the quote said, that should not be treated as funny.
Now, I do want to point out that it's possible that Jesus praised the women with condensation, but not with condescension.
No. My bad.
Dude, I did the same thing, only way worse because it was in a sermon and it went the opposite. I was preaching and I said, we're free to do it. I meant to say anything that God doesn't prohibit. And I said anything that God doesn't permit. And I'm like, oh, boy. Yeah. Now, granted, it doesn't say who this man is, that the woman had never known a man like this man, but she was not talking about John MacArthur, rather, but the Lord Jesus.
Right.
And so, yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's that to me, I read this and I say, okay, that's one aspect of Jesus. And I think it's the most important one because the women that we read about him encountering are all downtrodden. And
yes.
by virtue of being women generally in a very hardcore patriarchal culture that makes them pretty much second-class citizens, it stood out quite a bit. Also, though, I mean, I don't want to say, no, does John MacArthur sitting up there answering these funny little, give me one-word takes on this stuff, does that fit with... Well, I mean, who's to say that Jesus didn't also joke around? Jesus also, I didn't realize till after the fact what he was talking about, but because he hadn't posted the Sam Storms thing or I hadn't seen it, but Piper earlier today said that Jesus only ever had harsh words for religious leaders and hypocrites and people who are self-righteous. And I said, hold on, he called Herod a fox. And I don't think he meant fox like when Wayne and Garth would call a girl a fox. Through an intermediary, but he said, tell that fox. And he said, well, he would be filed under hypocrite. And I'm like, not so much. I mean, hypocrites are people who present themselves as righteous and hide their sin, whereas Herod flaunted his sin. There was a place where Jesus would have a bit of a sharp tongue. He just wasn't, freewheeling with it. It was surgical.
Right.
And I think the problem, first of all, the video of the interaction was obviously someone's cell phone. I don't think that John MacArthur and Phil Johnson thought this was going to go out to everyone. And some might go, well, you should only say what... Well, if you're talking to people who you already have 99% in common with, you can probably assume that they'll read you the right way. Right? Whereas if it was going to be going out, simulcast, webcast to everybody, they probably would have couched things a little differently. I'd like to give the benefit of the doubt on something like this. But if it were read in the wrong way by people, I think we would have gotten an apology by now.
Right.
And I haven't seen that. So I don't know. The whole thing to me just made me like Spurgeon. almost certainly would not have been a huge Beth Moore fan, and I say that for a few reasons. I don't feel the need to suss out. Maybe you disagree with me. I don't care. I mean,
Hmm.
like I don't care. Like it's not important to me. But if he
Right.
was, let's say, if he was not a big fan of hers and she was popular, I don't think he would have done that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just don't. And you know what? Never mind. I'm going to back off from that because I was reading some Spurgeon the other day, and the way he spoke in glowing words about certain women teachers, and even admitted to yoinking one of their kind of communion meditation outlines. He
Hmm.
may have been he may have been okay with her teaching the way she teaches. I don't. I just long for a time when we didn't have all this, and I
Yeah.
recognized when I discovered it at first, I was really excited because it sort of implied, ooh, I get to be a jerk, and it seems spiritual if I'm a jerk in this way. You know, when
Yeah.
I found Calvinism and I was cage staging, and
Right.
now I'm so burned out on it, and I'm going, ugh, that was such a icky road to go down, and I'm so
Yeah.
thankful for guys like John Piper, who
Yeah.
have done nothing but grow more and more gracious as they get
Yeah.
older and mature more and more in the faith. And I can look to them and say, that's the path I want to be on. I don't want to
Yeah.
get like hardened and spoiled milk more and more unpleasant. I want to be
Right.
more and more full of mercy, and the way I deal
Yeah.
with people to be more and more uh, like what Dorothy Sayers describes, the way that Jesus appeared to the women and the way he was with them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I absolutely agree. And I think that was, I think that was one of the great things that I appreciated about Sam Storm's article was just that was just his approach. You know, first of all, let's remember, Christ's own words where he said, they will know you're my disciples by the love you show to one another. And so the fact that he was pointing that out and redirecting all of us to that path, he wasn't calling for people to, lynch up MacArthur. I mean, he was calling to remind us all that we need to be more gracious to one another and kinder to one another.
Yeah, and I need to hear it. I know that. I read
Yeah.
that and thought, yeah, this is a needed corrective. I mean, Christian Twitter in general, the church in a hot take culture,
Mm-hmm.
particularly. Yeah, we need to hear that every once in a while. And it's if I read that and I react against it,
Mm-hmm.
I think that just indicates that the problem in me is even more significant.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, well,
Absolutely.
we've gone through more than half our time on that topic now. Just saying.
All right. Well, now we have the topic that we were going to talk about. Is ministry really the hardest thing? And by thing, is it really the hardest vocation? Is it really the hardest calling that's out there? Um, and Zach, you brought this one up, and was it because just something that was popping in your head, or did you recently have a pastoral friend who was kind of making some of these remarks, and that's what brought it to your mind?
I mean, it's the Yoda tweets, man, that are just like constant. And by Yoda tweets, this is something a brilliant term coined by the one and only Ted A. Cluck to describe tweets that start with the word pastors and then a comma, and often they seem like they're actually directed toward other people other than pastors to celebrate pastors. I don't know. And I used to do these tweets until I until I came headlong against somebody making fun of them in a way that made me realize, yeah, most of the time when I'm doing this, I'm trying to just look, like the holiest pastor on the block, and it's not really. I don't think there's a real market for. Maybe there are a few pastors out there who feel like, oh, it's just not even worth doing it, and this one tweet will get them through. Maybe, but again and again and again, I read, how difficult it is, how heavy it is on the heart, how everyone's frazzled. They always think, Saturday night. I always do a fake parody Yoda tweet on a Saturday night now. This last time I said pastors, comma, Do you remember that one commercial for Little Caesars when the cheese was bouncing on the table? That was it. That was the whole tweet. But like they're all like, I feel like the point is this is the hardest thing you could be doing.
Hmm.
And if you're not a pastor, you need to be praying for your pastor. Those are very common too. And yes, pray for your pastor, of course.
Right.
But
Yeah.
because he's about to just fall apart, there's these statistics that go around, like they have all been, 82% report having been betrayed.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like they've been betrayed by a friend, and 78% report having felt lonely or depressed in the past 6 months. And I'm like, yeah, but how does this stack up to just everybody? Right? I mean,
Right.
everybody's got problems. Yes, pastors, I know a lot of them who work so hard and it's thankless, but we knew that going in.
Right.
And like the notion that really irks me is the subtext to a lot of these things being, if you don't feel like you are going to fail at this and you are failing, you're probably not very holy. And
Mm.
so I guess I interrupted myself earlier. Like those Saturday night non-parody Yoda tweets from a lot of different people, and I'm not
Yeah.
just thinking of any one person. I mean, this is manifold on my Twitter feed.
Yeah.
They seem to say like on Saturday night, I know that you feel like you're not you're the last person who should be getting up and speaking and preaching, and you think it's going to be a disaster, but God can even use the disasters. Then on Sundays, it's always like, yeah, we know that you felt like this morning was awful and horrible, but God somehow touched somebody with it. And I'm like, well, what's wrong with me then? If I feel like I'm gifted to do this and I put in the
Right.
time and I'm going to do all right. I'm not tied in knots that Sunday morning is going to be a disaster, and only 1 out of 10 Sundays do I walk out of the pulpit going, "Oh man, that did not go well." Uh,
Right.
so like, what is this a martyr syndrome? Do you think? And as someone who's not in vocational ministry, I'd be curious to get your take on where
Yeah.
this comes from.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is, I think growing up, I remember hearing, the same kind of thing that revolved around pastors, missionaries, that, oh, this is God's work, and so you better make sure that you're in the right and that you're doing it, and there, I think there's all this added pressure and expectation to a certain extent. More and more, I've actually been over the years been glad to hear where I feel like more pastors are adequately shepherding their churches to the point where the congregation is not burdening the pastor like that. Where they expect their pastor to be holy as Jesus was holy, and if you're not, then get out of the pulpit. It's like it's the understanding that I'm here with you, guiding you in this, but I'm not perfect by any means, and I think there was this pretense that was put up for many years, and I think it still does go on in many churches, that the pastor is this person up there, and don't touch them or they'll break. As someone who I think any profession where you're dealing with people is draining. I've come to that conclusion, or it can be draining. Let me rephrase that. Because over the years, I've been in a number of different professions. And when I started off in my career, I was in tree work. And so there was nothing draining about cutting down trees other than the physical aspect of it. And so my level of being tired was strictly physical, had nothing to do with the emotional pouring into my job. I got up and I did my job, and got paid, and it was fine. There was nothing there was nothing to it really emotionally in that instance. I did notice a distinct difference in my level of exhaustion dealing with people when I became a teacher. And that's not to say that I don't enjoy it, and I don't. It's not something. I mean, I can't see myself doing anything else. I love, being a teacher. I love being in that position. I love working with the kids. I love working with their parents. But it does take an emotional toll on me that I've noticed that was not there when I was taking down trees. And so I think there's part of that aspect, but I don't. But again, like for me, working with people, I wouldn't want to go back taking down trees. I can't picture myself doing anything else. And I would hope that pastorally, you talked about just having a series of, funerals that you were doing or hospital visitations that you were doing. And that, takes a toll on you. We just talked about that. But again, can you really see yourself doing anything else, Zach?
Sure. Yeah. And I don't want to not be preaching on a Sunday morning. I would have to be involved on some level in church leadership, whatever church as long as I was qualified, whatever church I was part of, and teaching, because I have the seminary degree and the love for the text and the years of poring over it, and I want to share it. But I don't know, the whole, like, if you can see yourself doing anything else, do it. Making people feel like they're Marines or something when they're in the seminary.
Right.
It has its place, I guess. But I think all of this stuff, the tweets, and before it, that kind of stuff, the like fetishizing and holding up of, the notion that on Graduate Sunday, when there were kids going into business, some kids going in, planning to eventually go into education, and then me, the only one going into ministry, that like special prayer was made for me, as if that's the important work and the other is not important.
Right.
It all feeds into a very false dichotomy, a false view that really flies in the face of our Reformation understanding of vocation, that all callings are equally high callings and can be done for the glory of God, unless they are of their essence, sinful. And so if you're, somebody just blacking boots, or, people don't so much black boots anymore, but if you're,
How
whatever
old are
you're
you?
I'm channeling Spurgeon again.
Okay.
If you're a cobbler, to use a modern, or a blacksmith, no. I mean, you could be the guy who fixes cell phone screens because everyone always breaks them. And if you do that well and you do it to God's glory, and you can be looking for opportunities even to make connections for presenting the gospel. And I mean, these things, even if you don't have the spiritual component, working hard and working to the glory of God, you're in obedience to God's word, doing everything you do to his glory. You're not like second class. That's an old clergy laity distinction and divide that Luther overturned 500 years ago with scripture and with a proper hermeneutic and a proper worldview. And weirdly, I feel like, and I wasn't around, but I feel like it was the 50s where people really started kind of going back around to that real hardcore. And I feel like there's a lot of bad side effects to it. I don't want my people to think that I am like on the higher level, like I am floating above them and they go through me to get to God. Again, that misses what we reclaimed in the Reformation. And
you're the upper class Christian.
But isn't that a real, like, even if people wouldn't say it, they kind of imply it a lot of times. And what it does is it makes people not strive to know God's word because I'll know it for them. Not want to wrestle with difficult issues because I'll do it for them. And I'm happy to help. In fact, nothing brings me more joy than when someone will email me or call me out of the blue and say, I'm reading this scripture and can you help me understand it? That's like the best thing in the world for me. But I don't want them to just say, well, I can't understand this because I'm not the pastor, and the pastor does all this stuff and he shoulders all this. And Now, what really got me thinking on this was a particular tweet that was from Ronnie Martin, who's a friend of mine and a podcaster and a pastor and a speaker and stuff, and a common Yoda tweeter, although I think his are often like the non-annoying, non-smarmy ones. And
Mm-hmm.
one of his that got everyone freaking out was he said, "If you think preaching is hard, try pastoring." And it started with pastors, comma.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd think it was just for pastors. And uh, if, obviously we made much on the Gut Check Press about the fact that Jonathan Merritt like retweeted and responded to it because that was a funny colliding of worlds. But a lot of people reacted like really negatively, like
Mm-hmm.
nurses. You don't see me bragging about how hard it is that I have to tell women that are, new mothers that they're dying of cancer, and then they forget because it's brain cancer, and I have to tell them 3 more times. And I responded to something like that saying, actually, I do see you bragging about that right above in
Right.
that tweet. But like, not pastors responded to it. Everybody was like defending, well, and then B, I think they missed the point. He was
Mm-hmm.
saying, Pastor, if you're like pouring yourself into being a great preacher and you're struggling with how hard that is, you're missing a lot of what you're supposed to be doing, which is,
Mm-hmm.
the non-glorious, non-glamorous stuff. Not that preaching is actually glamorous, but like the stuff where you're not up front, where
Right.
you're with a elderly parishioner or with a sick individual or whatever the case. And I started noticing after that a lot of other people had this repeated theme of like, and he came out in response to this stuff saying, I didn't mean it like that. You misread me. I wasn't saying that this is harder than all other jobs, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are saying that, or at least implying it.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are pastors, and then a lot of people, like I absorbed a little of that, I think, from my parents. Like there was this reverence for the office of pastor that it was proper, but then there was
Right.
this notion that like, oh man, those poor pastors. Now, what I wished we would have had um, Dutcher on this time is because he, actually got to a point where he was working so very hard and so very
Right.
long at this stuff that it burned him right out. And I'd
Right.
like to have him kind of bridge that divide and say, well, maybe it's, and I can't put words in his mouth, but maybe it's not the position of pastor, but it's anytime you start laying all the burden on your own shoulders or something. Like, I mean, I could see you doing that as a high school principal.
Oh yeah.
I could see someone I have seen someone who's running a store do that. They're working
Yeah.
so much they actually
Yeah. Burn out.
burn right out. And I think that learning to rest in God and lean on Him is not unique to people who are missionaries, pastors, anyone in full time,
Mm-hmm.
professional ministry or vocational ministry.
Right.
And I don't know. I really bristle at the notion that all pastors are. I'm not insanely busy. I don't let
Yeah.
that happen. You know why?
Yeah.
That would be a crappy use of my God-given gifts and where
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to be equipping. It would
Yep.
be a crappy way to shortchange my family and a vocation that's more important to me than pastor is father and husband.
Right.
And I just learned early on that you don't have to be.
Yeah.
And most of what keeps pastors so busy that they're about ready to collapse, if that's the case, it's not stuff they needed to do. It's
Right.
it's I,
Right.
I put everything in my Palm Pilot, and if someone wants me to come and this doesn't happen much anymore, but come and pray at the Rotary Club or before the Relay for Life or whatever, I flip
Yep.
it open, and if I have put down taking my kid to get a milkshake or taking a bike ride or whatever, I say, oh, I can't do it. If it's a
Yep.
funeral, I'll bump the thing. I'll say I can move some stuff around, but
Right.
I've got it on my schedule, and there it is. And so I think that it has to do with this self-martyr complex.
Yeah.
If I'm suffering because I'm working so hard, I'm more worthy. Well,
Yeah.
no, you're not. And
Yeah.
and we can't be more. And the moment we think we're more worthy, we've missed the boat, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Absolutely. And I think, what you were talking about really, it rings true. Like you said, I mean, you can very easily, run yourself ragged. Doing school administration, being a teacher. That's one of the things that my wife and I, had conversations about early on because she's the type of person that could very easily get up at 5 in the morning and work on schoolwork from 5 until midnight, go to bed for 5 hours and get up and do it all over again. And so, her and I set some very clear boundaries because she started teaching before I did. With, okay, this is kind of when, things need to stop and we need to be, spending time together and making sure that you're breaking away and doing things that are going to, kind of refresh you so you're not piling all this on, and that doesn't mean that there aren't times where life isn't crazy and busy. I just, you asked me how things were going, and, my response was crazy and busy. But it's also a time and season right now in my life where there is an end in sight where things will slow down. Right now I have a couple other things added on my plate that will not be there in about a year. Mainly master's courses, and so I think like you said though, it's important to pull back and say, you know what, I've made this commitment to my family, and I'm going to keep this commitment to my family, and if the world falls apart around me, it's going to fall apart. But that's resting in the security that God's not going to, the world isn't running and spinning because you're running and spinning. The world's running and spinning because God's causing it to run and spin. Um,
If you
and
believe that it's round.
one of them flat earthers, eh? uh, So, it is, and to your point too, like the idea that, if you can't see yourself doing anything else, I mean, here's the deal. I've done tons of other things. In since I could work and I could hold a job, I've done so many different things. And even in my career, I've done so many different things. My thing of, being a teacher is I see very clearly this is where my natural gifting is. I've worked very hard in the other jobs. I've, made lots of money in the other jobs, but there was something in my passion for that was missing, that is there when I'm teaching or when I'm working with students. And I would guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Zach, but the same thing is probably true for you. You've had other jobs and things like that before. This is where your passion is in preaching. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I don't so much have any other job that interests me. There's a few occasionally I go, ooh, that looks like it would be kind of a nice life.
Mm-hmm.
I more like by principle say I don't like the notion that God
Mm-hmm.
makes us and puts a chip in us that says this is what this person's supposed to do, and if they don't find that and they do something else, they're
Yeah.
not going to be happy and they're not going to be doing my will. Like I mean, God's will is a circle, not a point.
Right.
So that's more what I'm saying. And I do believe,
Yeah.
a lot of reformed people are so reformed they don't even believe in a calling. That's too continuationist for them. I do believe in a calling, and I believe I'm
Sure.
called to ministry. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe I protest too much in that category. I really do think I would be unhappy in in some ways if I were made to leave the pastorate today.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. I mean, I know, um, when I started out teaching, I had to leave teaching for a period of time, and I believe that what I was doing was preparing me for God to bring me back into teaching. Um, I didn't leave because of any horrific thing. It literally boiled down to, Joy and I had college debt to pay, and us both being private school teachers wasn't paying it, and that's literally why I ended up going and doing something else. But even in that, I could see God was still using that and working in me, and I enjoyed what I was doing. I mean, for 4 years I had a gap where I wasn't teaching. For 3 of those years I was working at the liquor store. I loved what I was doing at the liquor store because it was basically like being a teacher, people would come in and they would ask me about the alcohol, and I got to sit there and explain to them all the various types and kinds, and why go with this beer instead of that beer, why go with this drink instead of that drink, and I got to actually use my gifts and working with people and speaking with people in that industry, and it was great. I loved it.
I bet you did, you friggin' lush. By the way,
it's 5 o'clock somewhere, baby. 5 o'clock somewhere.
I think maybe we need a missional T-shirt that says, I loved working at the liquor store. It was just like being a teacher. Nathan Bell.
Jeff, you heard it here first.
Oh, Jeff's like 7 years behind on all the podcasts.
Oh, I
He
know,
has
I
so
know.
many he has to keep up on. That's why we can say stuff with impunity. By the time he hears it, I mean, it doesn't count anymore. Hey, man, I gotta roll here in a minute. I wonder if we want to take a minute. I want to throw out some podcasts I've been listening to. I want to share with people, and I don't know if you had any too. I mentioned that to you earlier.
Yeah, go for it.
Here's what I've been listening to, and I'm going to leave out the stuff that was disappointing. I only want to tell you stuff I recommend.
Okay.
The one that made me want to talk about podcasts is called 1865. Mm-hmm. It is so good. It is a dramatization, but I mean, it's pure radio theater to the point where you can hear people moving around in the room, even though they're recording. They're recording dry as well, probably in a better sound booth than me.
Yep.
It's different voice actors. It's just amazing, and it starts with the assassination of Lincoln, and it goes through the next year or so. And I learned a ton. It was really, really good, and it left me going, crap, what else is? And I've tried a few things, and I haven't found anything that lives up to it at all. So check out 1860. And in between episodes that are like radio theater, they have the guys talking about, this is what was fictionalized, and this happened this way, but we chose to do it this way, and this is what's definitely fact, and it's really fascinating. I've been listening to one called 20,000 Hertz, which is just all about sound, and the history of sound, the stories behind iconic sounds, like the Mac boot up sound or the NBC chimes or whatever. I love that one as well. It's kind of for nerds. So it works perfect for me. I've been listening to one called Memory Palace, which has been around a while, but I'm just warming up to it. Short little, it's almost like New Yorker type things, or it's kind of along the same lines as like This American Life or something, but
Okay.
no interviews. It's just one guy reading kind of a really insightful essay each time. Some are funny, some are heartbreaking. You'll know right away if you listen to one whether or not it's for you. The Memory
Nice.
Palace. And then the last one I just started listening to, it's brand new. There's just been 2 episodes. It's called Office Ladies. And it is Angela Kinsey, who played Angela on The Office, and Jenna Fisher, who played Pam. They're watching their way through the whole series, and they're going to just comment on them.
Nice.
Episode by episode, give you behind-the-scenes stuff. Next time, the 3rd episode, they're going to have Rainn Wilson, like, Skyping in. I'm pretty stoked about it because we're currently introducing my son to The Office an episode at a time. So, in fact, it's 7:30, so he's probably wondering where I am, and we're going to Mom's out of town, so we're going to get some subs and watch some Office. So,
Nice.
do you have any as I drive over to the door of the dojo?
Actually, I don't. I haven't been listening to podcasts. This summer, my wife and I drove into work together, and she's not a podcast listener, so
She probably wants to talk, right?
actually, no. In the morning, neither of us want to talk to each other. It's we are not morning people, and so we had an hour drive in, and it was silent. Not because we were mad at each other or anything. We're just not morning people, and so
That's a bummer.
we just drove into work. But I have not got back into back into listening to podcasts. Actually, I've been using that time. We've been starting a Bible study, so I've been kind of using that time to mentally prepare and work through the Bible study that we've been doing. So that's I do want to get back into it though. So hopefully, within the next couple weeks, we're going to have Dutcher on, and I can give some recommendations of some podcasts then. So
Nice.
All right. Well, just want to tell people real quick, don't forget to like us on your favorite listening area: iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean. Set up a review for us. Gets us higher on the list so people can find us easier. And Zach, we just rocked the Casbah.
These go to 11.